Okay. So without my little note that just helps me keep track, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on where I work and rest and play. And they actually would be different where I am here, and I don't remember the name. So normally I work and rest and play on Gubbi Gubbi land, but here it's different. So I want to acknowledge them too, and their ancestors and their elders, emerging, past and present. And I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands upon where each of you rest and where each of you are at the moment. And I'm just going to tell my computer to don't bother me with updates. And so today I have a small slide presentation of like 4 slides to go through, and it's just a little bit of an add-on to what you've already been learning about the shadow of the helper. All right, so does everybody feel like they're on track with this module at this point of time, and that we're going to have a nice conversation about it? But does everybody feel like they're tracking it at this point? They know kind of where we are and what we're doing and what we're exploring. Does anybody have any burning questions or thoughts before we jump into the last part to then be able to unpack some more stuff? All seems good. Okay, great. So I'm going to bring up my slides, if I can remember where they are. Just give me a sec. I think they should be in the download folder. Yes, okay, so that should work. All right. So if I share my screen. No, don't share it first yet, hang on. Skip there with me. It's just a 6, 2. Okay, now share screen. No. Now, why can't I show you that? I'm sorry, I'm just struggling to find out how to show you the screen on this. It's not behaving, I don't think. No. Can you see a slide presentation? Oh, fantastic. Okay, good. All right, so that has worked. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay. So this is, it should be a PDF rather than a normal slide presentation, just to make things easier. Okay. All right, so we're actually doing part 2 of module 6, the shadow of the helper archetype today. This is I would call it, you know, almost like the roadmap to transforming that archetype to their, you know, their highest expression is in today's module. So hopefully it is willing to let me advance the PDF. Okay, that's one. It's this way. All right, so just to recap briefly, and it's just a one slide recap, because I'm really hoping that you all have the, you know, some sense of that hierarchy that we travel through, you know, when we're under stress. And those are the authentic altruist, the caring person or proud helper, the gifted empath or nurturing helper, and the obsessive or self-sacrificing helper, right? There's just some names for them. You could call them something else entirely if you wished. So here we have we've got, we've drilled it down to there being two primary unconscious beliefs that drive overgiving. And although everybody probably has a bit of both, there tends to be one that may drive you over the lifetime or your life cycle, but also one that may influence a particular cycle or period of time in your life. And when that one feels more resolved, then you may start working on the other piece. So I want you to see this as a holistic roadmap, a holistic solution that it's a bit like the Enneagram, where the helper archetype really comes from is the number 2 in the Enneagram. And this is the Enneagram is a beautiful 9 segment of, let's say, the personality, right? And we all shift around that, and we can actually shift and resolve and work through all 9 aspects of ourselves. It's why it's not always so simple to determine which Enneagram number you are, because under stress you move to a different one. When you're in your flow, you move to a different one. You integrate all of the best attributes of your type, and then you start moving through the 9 types. So I feel like this is somewhat similar. But this time we only have two primary unconscious beliefs. Now, when I say unconscious belief, I am talking about below. So it's really a core belief. It's below other beliefs that you may have. It's at the very core and the essence of what creates other beliefs. Okay, so you'll be able to find lots and lots of things sitting on top of this, but this is the core belief that really that sparks the overgiver, or one of them here as I'm about to present to you. So the first one that drives overgiving, manifests the helper archetype, is a fear of being unloved, insignificant, and inconsequential. This fear of being and deserving nothing triggers a desire to please others through overgiving. You look for confirmation of your worth through giving to others, and believe your worth is only acquired through giving. Okay. Now I am going to look at the second core belief, if you like, that drives overgiving, and that's the fear of being vulnerable. Fear, if you don't give to or please others, you will be seen as a threat and will be attacked, or authority figures will withdraw their protection, love, and support. You fear you will be blamed if things go wrong because you didn't give up your needs for the other person. Okay, so this one here has a more active fear of being attacked and annihilated through being attacked or being blamed, or and protection and support being withdrawn. And the other one is being annihilated through being inconsequential, right? Being overlooked. And so it's both of them. So this one I see as a more existential fear. And this one here is actually the ego is a bit more developed in this case. And there's a sense of lack of protection, whereas here there's just a sense of lack, I would say. There's a completely different feeling to it. Here, there is such a small expression of self here that you know, it's an existential crisis, because it's like, why am I here? What is my existence, purpose of my existence? Do I exist? All right. And needing the other to affirm your existence. And the route that you've found to do that is through giving and helping. All right. And this one here is needing to affirm that you are safe, that others won't harm you, hurt you, or withdraw from you, or consider you're at fault when things go wrong for them. And so you get more over involved, and really that's where the essence of control comes from, right? Over involved in other people's life activities, destiny, so that you can help things work out for them. All right. Now, I often see this particularly showing up in helpers in terms of like trying to control the process for their clients, right? Because it comes from that core belief of that if I don't do that and keep everybody safe, then I'm going to get blamed. All right. Everything's going to go wrong and I'm going to get blamed. Okay. So we have two strategies for recovery for these two existential and annihilation crises, if you like. The recovery strategy for the first, the fear of being unloved, insignificant, and inconsequential, is developing an insight into your own motivations for helping. Understanding that at an unconscious fear-based level, you are giving to get. And actively take measures to stop from reflexively reaching out to satisfy others' needs. You've probably heard this a number of times through the videos I've set out to you, through last week's class as well. Actively taking measures to stop from reflexively reaching out to satisfy others' needs. All right. It's one of those things that helpers can really struggle with when they see somebody who is needing something or can't find what they're looking for at this point of time, if you like. Okay. So there are two primary recovery strategies there: developing insight and stopping that impulse to help, right? Like really. And that doesn't mean not helping, but that means that reflexive impulse to help needs to be curtailed. And so then it becomes a much more reflective process as to what do I want to do here and what is needed here. All right. So a lot of insight in the first one, with the first core belief in particular. All right. And obviously insight is always welcome and valuable in every instance. Okay. For the fear of being vulnerable, okay, the recovery strategy, there are three suggestions here. One is reclaiming your own sense of internal authority to deal with the world and authority figures in an empowered way, and seeing how you interact with authority figures, teachers, people at the road traffic authority, police officers, you know, the council, your landlord, whatever, may give you an insight into how you're dealing with authorities. What happens is quite often there's a tendency for deference to authority and then a resentment about deferring to authority. It tends to have that swing, you know, that pendulation that moves from really like, you know, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, I hate you, you know, you don't have power over me, I'm going to make, you know, the world hell for you, yes sir, no sir, 3 sir. So that kind of swing, and that might not be that overt, but it's definitely where I see it is where people put themselves below others. So they'll put others at a higher level than themselves, and they struggle with equality in their relationships. Now, they don't mean to put others above themselves, but it's a strategy to stop them from overpowering others. So it's a strategy to deal with their struggle with power. Okay, so if you feel like you have issues with power in your relationships, or that may be a family theme, you probably will relate to this one. Whether or not it's your core belief, it could be arguable, but if it's a family pattern, it probably is. Almost certainly is. Okay. So moving on to the next strategy. This is assertiveness and communication training. Okay, so I recommend nonviolent communication or compassionate communication for this. So it's not it's much more nuanced than just pure assertiveness training, but that is really what benefits this, is really coming to a point of equality with others, is how I would really describe this. And the other thing that this particular archetype or manifestation of the archetype, sub-archetype needs are grounding and body-oriented practices to help them recognize they possess an internal reservoir of experiences that can protect them, and that they do not need to sell themselves out by overriding their impulses and needs in attempts to avoid feeling vulnerable and exposed. Okay. So grounding in particular is really, really important for this particular expression. Developing the strength in the lower body. It tends to be the power and the energy is all upwardly moving. And with this particular strategy, we need to just help the energy descend. Okay. So I can stop my sharing there, because literally that is the slide presentation for today. Because this, this information usually opens up a lot of questions, thoughts, reflections for people as to where they might be in this picture, and what they have done, or how they relate to others in this. So I'm going to ask you all to have a little, you've probably, as I went through it, already started to identify where you might be and which one might be prevalent for you. And how about we start with that, and, bearing in mind that, as I said, it might be a life cycle pattern, or it might be a part of a life cycle pattern that you might have even identified, changes and shifts, or you might still be working on one and have only worked on one so far. Who knows whether there will be another? That's highly possible if you're only working one so far. But yeah, I'd be kind of interested to see, because and I think it's worth saying that it whether or not you've seen a shift or not probably depends on two things. One, your age, right? Because whether you've been through a couple of Saturn returns probably makes a difference. And two, what's happened in your life. It's not just always your age, okay? There's certain things, certain really big pivotal things that happen in people's lives that will accelerate that. So and the reason I'm telling you that is when you're listening to others, you don't need to compare yourself to, well, I haven't been there, I haven't done that yet. Does that mean that I'm behind? It could mean that they're older, or it could mean that they've just had a really different kind of life experience, and some really pivotal things have shifted those things that they're working on, right? So I want you to put that out there so that you all understand that you're sharing from your own perspective and your own life experience and what's happened so far in your lives. Okay. And what families you've been born into. Okay. What karmas you have decided to come in and work this time. Okay. So does anyone feel like they would like to start? Okay, Sybil.
I would love to. I think, and I love that you brought in that last part, the age, sense of length of time with some of my holding patterns, I would say, as the healer as it relates to mother energy and the healing of the family and the family unit. So with age and time comes the time for my grown children to work through some of their patterns and ask of myself and my husband some of the repair work. So with my age has come that. And most recently, a huge expansion happened by facilitating an environment where my two grown daughters were able to meet together in the woods camping. I gave them the gift of a concert. Their various partners have met and feel good with each other. And so there's a coming home for them. So there's some repair work in their lives. And I just witnessed it and provided an environment for them to do so. So that has been very expansive for me. And then on the tails of that, within my work, I had a situation, and I talked about it a little bit on Facebook because I have been very busy in this experience, both with my children and also with one of my clients, is an experience where I actually held a boundary. I actually felt free enough to feel the desire for me not to hold a boundary for her because I knew how I had very good idea, fairly strong feeling and pattern with her of how she'd react. And I think I was in this number two, the fear, right, of being at fault or that something would come back at me in a very strong way that I then would not be able to metabolize well and would create more of a pattern that wasn't healthy, was how it felt to me. So I was always a little afraid that there was going to be something coming back and I wouldn't know exactly how to do it. But with this expansion of space and age and these things, and on the heels of that, I felt so free to put a very firm boundary about text communication and how it made me feel and how I'd like to move forward. It exploded back at me just as I expected. But what's really interesting, I was able to neither need to convince her that all the questions, the thousands of questions she wanted to know from me as to why I was doing this. I didn't need to defend myself or convince her that there was anything that I did that was actually needed at that time. I just continued to hold the boundary. And what I'm feeling now today, I think, is this feeling that I don't know how to feel without this feeling of feeling like, oh no, did I do something wrong? But I'm freeing myself of having to let her process be hers, that I don't need to be in the middle of it, that I'm able to hold my boundary, but it also feels a little like, oh, the vibration is just sort of here, but it's different. It just feels like this is so new and so different for me to feel this feeling of firmness and really just accepting that it's not forever. Like, she is so welcome to come back to me with a different conversation at a different time. And I'd be ready and willing to have any conversation. Like, it's not a boundary that will force anything. And so, yeah, you're about to say something. So
yeah, I was.
I'm just looking for feedback there.
Yeah, so the way it feels to me, and this is how, this might be interesting, and it feels to me like you are inviting her into equality with you.
Yeah.
even through this ironic, I'm setting a boundary and, you know, and putting limits on you, et cetera, like how that could look from the outside, and to her child, like her reactive child, that's of course how it looks. But actually the deeper level feels like, for us to have an equal relationship and for you to be more empowered to have that equal relationship, I need to set a boundary first.
Yes.
So I guess the question I have is, like, if you were to take a little moment to feel into your body and feel into your imagination even as well, but I think it's in your imaginary body, is how does it feel to be in, what would it feel like to be in equal relationship with her?
It would feel light and playful, and no, the visual is like everybody's wounds have been patched up so that there's no poking of wounds. Like there's no fear that you're poking someone's wound, that it's just free and playful, and there's no guardedness that somehow each of our own individual states of being would hurt the other. That's how it would feel.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really important thing, is like, you don't have that fear of triggering each other's wounds.
Yes.
Right. You know, however they look, really. I mean, they're obviously sufficiently patched that they're not open gaping wounds, but they don't have to be perfect either. There just is no longer a fear, because everybody's contacted their own empowerment, and they have enough of their own resources that they don't feel disempowered when they're with others, right? That's really, that's the essence of this wound and healing it, right? Is inviting yourself and others into equality. And that includes even people who may be in positions of very high power. You know, it might, you know, include not seeing yourself as less than your highest spiritual teacher, for example, right? Not seeing yourself as less than that. You are the same. You are equal to that. All right. So it really moves away from maybe the Western interpretation of what guru is, right? Thanks, Sybil.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for that last little bit.
Does anyone else have any thoughts, things to share? Candy?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sybil. I didn't know that one was alive in me, so your sharing helped me connect a few bits and pieces. So I think in the last week I've been playing with the fear of not being loved, and that being in worth and things like that around my business and money. But yesterday I shared an email, and I had a client come back and say she was interested in my offer. And I noticed this fear come up of, oh God, you know, like for so long, it's like, oh, you know, I'm, you know, wanting to get a client. And then when I get the client, it's like, oh no, what if I mess it up? What if I get it wrong? What if I can't hold her through what she's moving through? So just noticing that fear of being vulnerable shows up when I then am with the client. So just feeling into that, seeing us as equals. And I've worked with her before and we've been friends and I know her well. So just having that experience just then of feeling into what it would be like for us to both be at the table equal, and to just, that felt so much better and so much more empowering and safer to feel that there wasn't like a she needing me, or you know, any of that old dynamic of fixing or saving or any of that ickiness. So yeah, I don't know, that's just kind of what's right here right now.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is relevant to you, but I think it's relevant to someone here. And I remember It was in one of my Buddhist readings I was doing, you know, I've done lots of different readings of different religious texts and stuff. So, but I did like a lot of what the Buddhists and the Vedic said. But I remember this particular thing really striking a chord with me. And it was talking about how the biggest fear humans have. So it was not talking about from a wound perspective. It was just talking about the human crisis, the wound that the humans come in with, that they're trying to avoid knowing the truth of, is how vulnerable it is to be born human. So we actually have this essential vulnerability as humans, because we die, that we are always trying to avoid. So even the Buddhists identified that. You know, there's, you know, a lot in the more modern discourse around our disconnection from death and dying, right? But it was observed by the Buddhists in some way, even perhaps at times when there was a lot more connection to death and dying, that humans were trying to avoid the reality that that being human was essentially a vulnerable state. Okay. And so there's something in that helps remind me whenever I'm, you know, trying to avoid my vulnerability, I say to myself, I can't, right? At the absolute core of who I am vulnerable. And if I'm willing to go to that absolute core of who I am and acknowledge that I am vulnerable just because I was born, and because I will die, then all the other levels of vulnerability just kind of are part of it. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that one. Yeah, there's lots happening in my body at the moment.
Yeah, I didn't really know why I was saying it until I had said it, and then suddenly I was like, oh yes, that's why I'm telling you.
My brain's like, okay, and my body's like, okay.
Yeah.
Something's settling into that. But another thought that's coming to mind as well is that earlier this week I had a friend who reached out to me in just, you know, kind of distress. And, you know, that's a habit of mine, is to then leap into and get overly involved in my friends' things. And I noticed that impulse this time, and I didn't, and I pulled back, and I didn't help. And so again, that was a new practice for me of just holding back in a place of just being like, do I need to be involved? Is this, you know, for me to get involved in? Or so that was a new experience for me as well.
And how did you go with that? Like, how did you feel afterwards about having done that, taken that action? How did you go?
I had a little bit of that second fear come up. I messaged her a few days later because I kept getting the don't help. And so I messaged her and I said, you know, for whatever reason, I didn't feel to jump in, or whenever I thought about it, I didn't. I hope you didn't feel unsupported or something like that. And she said, you know, not at all, you know, thanks anyway. I managed to figure it out or do it this other way. So there was obviously that little bit of a drive there to say, oh no, have I damaged this friendship, or have I let her down, you know?
And yet at least the way that you reached out to check if everything was okay was a very mature and equal approach to doing that. It wasn't like, are you okay? Are we okay? And please tell me that everything between us is okay. Like, that's a very different kind of energy than the one that you're reporting you went back to her with.
Yeah.
So you may have noticed a little bit of butterflies, perhaps, of like, okay, is everything going to be okay, or am I still going to be loved, or whatever? But it was something that you had the capacity to hold and not be reactive to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ships are happening.
which is obviously what we want. We're not trying to eradicate feelings.
Yeah.
We're trying to build the capacity to stay with a feel, to notice first that the feeling exists, and then to stay and hold that feeling and not necessarily react to that, but to still figure out how to respond to get your needs met, and have the space for the other person to find them, to be able to get their needs met as well without doing it for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Candy. Tara, are you? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting with both of those shares. I'm like, ooh, my solar plexus is getting tight. And I noticed myself going into like assessing myself and how I am. And I think I shared like, I'm famous for going overtime in my sessions. Sometimes it's an hour, like it's like way, way over giving. So just seeing where I would say I lose myself in the session to being the listener. And then notice when I'm in the session, questioning or not, if I can actually do something to help that person. So then it's like this over giving to prove my worth, but at the same time feeling doubt. And then, you know, in those moments of, you know, maybe that's the pause of not being in flow or in my intuition is that place of doubt where I go overtime. It's like,
well,
and then not trusting myself. And then it's like, oh, I got to overgive. Like I kind of sit in this limbo of going, oh, can I do anything? I'm like, oh, this is way over my head. Like I can't, but you know, I always pull something out. But this has just brought this curiosity just in this moment. It's like, oh, maybe that's the place where I sit in unworthiness or not good enough or can't do it, and then end up blowing it out because I'm not in my own center.
So I'm going to ask you a quick question, Tara, first. Are you resilient enough for me to give you a little bit of a universal slap before I do? How are you feeling today?
Yeah,
So or okay?
I'm up for a slap. I don't mind. I'm good. I'm happy for feedback or slaps or questions.
Yeah, I know. This is just it really hit me when you were talking about your session, and that you moved into the role of the listener, and then you start to question whether you can help, right? At that point, you were thinking about yourself.
Yeah, that's where I sit, and that's where
that's the point where everything diverges from that point.
Totally.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's your work, is to move back away from making it about yourself, and whether you can, and whatever your insecurity is. When you shift into that, because of course you obviously recover yourself at some point, to a point where you then bring it back to the client, right? I'm not suggesting that you don't, but there is the moment where you do lose the clear track of what you were there for and who you were there for, and it just, you become more in the session and in that moment. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, and that's the part where I think, oh, I lost my center, and now then wasting that time on myself, then I have to go over in the session.
Yes, yeah, and it's not to say, like, truly, there are times when all of us will have something that where we might, as helpers, come a little bit more into the session, right? That's how it goes. But if that's a kind of a pattern that you can perceive in yourself, there is that moment where the doubt comes in, that that overtakes the session for that moment, and that can then trickle forward into it just being easier session for you to facilitate, which might mean then not the 1 hour going over time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So then what's the
Solution. What's
solution?
the thing? So if we go back to our, if we go back to these strategies and the place where you might be sitting, right? So I think you're in the second one. Would you say that's correct? That fear of being vulnerable? Do you see how that relates to I might not be doing it right, or can I help? Is the fear of being vulnerable? Do you see how
Yeah.
they relate?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, great. Okay. Does everybody get that? It's like that's how if I can't help, then that's a level, that's an area of vulnerability, right? So your I know you know NVC very well, don't you, Tara? That's so because there's the 3 strategies, right? There's the assertive and communication training, which I know you're already got. So if we look at the other 2 things, there's the reclaiming your sense of internal authority to deal with the world and authorities figures in an empowered way. For me, that's that sense of seeing yourself as equal, right? Being able to really relate at an equal level, and it's almost shifting the paradigm from there being some in power and some not in power, that it actually is, it's trying to actually change that whole power paradigm in one's own internal experience. So that's very hard work, but one can do it perhaps in parts of one's lives or parts of one's experiences where you can possibly more easily bring that in. I know sometimes I feel very frustrated about certain things that I have no influence and control over because other people have influence and control over my lives, like politicians or policymakers and things like that. And so I might get really frustrated about that power imbalance and the fact that I don't have that power. And there's not really much I can do about that on an outside thing, but I can do a lot of internal work over that, right? So I think that's the piece for that internal authority piece. And then and maybe this is another area, it's recognizing that you have an internal reservoir of experiences that protect you, regardless of what those experiences might be seen as negative or disempowering or traumatic or horrific or whatever they may be, that they in themselves protect you, not just your resiliency to overcome them, but the actual experience themselves is a protective force. So again, that's almost at a metaphysical level, it's really moving the good, bad, traumatic, not traumatic, negative, positive, all of that, with those polarities, it's removing that from your experience as well.
I'm not sure I got that.
Okay. So the idea that if you've been through a traumatic experience, if you're able to rewrite the narrative in an embodied way, that is actually a protective experience. So I'm not saying to make it into a good, but it actually is a protective experience. That means that all experiences then become equal.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So they become equally powerful, equally protective, and remove those polarities. So maybe one of those or both of those may resonate with you, but that would be the work of rewriting the story of, what is protective and what has been a trauma to overcome, or rewriting the story about disempowerment in relation to others.
Okay, well, we can do a session on that.
I think at least one for each.
Yeah. Sounds like my poor little body's like, ooh.
Yeah, no, that's really big. It's huge work. It's like what we've just named here and talked about here, Tara, is huge work for you to do. Like, it's a big piece. So, you know, thank you for stepping up and saying, yep, I'm up for it, you know, and that you wanted to drop into this place. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, and the other thing is, because when I reflect on it, I'm like, oh God, I created a whole career for my whole life out of safety of being the helper, because there I'm safe. So yeah, I think I've known that a long time. I'm like, oh yeah, rescuer, and having to bring that back into balance. It's myself.
So I remember very, very clearly the day, the time, the training. It was in a lunch break, and I was sitting on my own, and I was in San Francisco doing a training, attachment training, and I just had this flash of awareness when I realized that all of my attempts and work to help others feel safe was so that I was convincing them that I was safe enough so that they wouldn't attack me first. Right. So all of my work to support others was really had an underlying motivation that what I was trying to do is I will make you safe so that you identify me as safe, and therefore you won't attack me. But it's my job to make you feel safe. It's not. And so what I didn't know was that it was their job to help them feel safe, not mine. Because it always had been my job to make my mother safe so she didn't attack me. Right. So that's where it came from. But I had no idea. I didn't even know how that piece related until years later to my mother. But I did know that I mean, I did know it was to mum, but not in the same way that I know it now. But that was the piece that I had learned, right? And I thought here I was doing all this work to help people feel safe. And then suddenly I realized it was because I needed to convince them that I was safe so that I could feel safe. So it was all about me. At the end of the day, it was about my fear that they would attack me. And so my strategy was to make them safe. So here I was doing all this lovely, nice, safe work, but it was really about me. And I remember that. And it was like a big slap in the face, right? On my own cord, right? I sat there and I was like, oh shit, this is really selfish.
Yeah.
Or it, you know, I mean, it comes from, you know, and I don't mean selfish in terms of like berating myself. It just comes from a place of self-protection.
Yeah.
Right?
And like to get.
And I hadn't seen that. I thought that I was doing it for others.
And giving to get sense of safety.
Giving. Yeah. So effectively I was giving to get, but it was so deep in my psyche. Right.
Yeah.
That I wasn't even aware that I needed, that I was so feeling so unsafe that I had the strategy of just making other people safe so that I didn't get hurt.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a really big piece, you know, and that's, you know, that relates to that, the vulnerability and the power piece, right? It's when you've been overpowered by others in your family of origin. I mean, I've known for years that power was the theme in my family of origin, right? Power and control, but particularly power. I used to dream about situations, past lives where there was power imbalances all the time.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, I have that too, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
I'll reach out for that session, eh?
Yeah. I was only thinking about you the other day. Yesterday, probably, because I was filling up my calendar and I thought, oh, okay, I haven't got Tara in there. Thank you, Tara.
You're
Anyone
welcome.
else? Beth?
Yeah, can relate to everything, all the things. Can't figure out what I'm sort of living more, 1 or 2, but feeling the return, like I've definitely had awareness that everything that I've put on my plate currently is to assist me to feel bolstered and safe. And I wrote them down yesterday. I have 9 courses that I've enrolled in the last 2 years. And all of them are to, I think, help me to feel that I'm safe, and to be a safe place for others, and to prove myself as, you know, I know what I'm doing. You know, but really this expansion training came at the right time for me, because I understood that no matter what I took on and was integrating, fundamentally I wasn't really able to hold the other person, because there's something that's still emerging, and probably more clearest to me now in this conversation, and in the shadow work that we started on. So yeah, it's been fascinating that it was triggered by me coming under attack and then having wobbly legs, trying to get that course under my belt that would fix it. So approaching it like, well, I'll never be like that person who stuffed me up, you know, rather than doing the healing work to
That's
yeah,
a good motivator.
right. But then realizing at the end of last year, when I had a client who really threw me overboard, when I was meant to be wrapping up the consult in 2 hours, and she'd started to spiral, and I was with her for 5, and then 5 again the next day, and then 5 again 2 days after that, and then 5 again, you know, just to make sure that, you know, I wasn't going to lose this patient. Like, that's the feeling. It was quite a survival situation. And so there's definitely been something deeply destabilized in my system that I'm trying to like climb out of.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to figure out, sort of as you began, I got this image. It sort of looked like, you know, like I think almost like a coffee ground, you know, how there's like I was told seed, but, you know, and like one of the seeds was the, you know, the first core belief, and one of the seeds was the second core belief. And I was sitting here holding as like, you know, like knowing a lot about you historically, I definitely knew there was a power piece, right? But here I was able to drop into, it's like, oh, okay, here's that existential piece, right? So I literally could feel both of them. And so then I just kept dropping until something happened and changed, as you talked. And the thing that changed was when you said you started to wobble. And that made sense to me, how that activated that existential crisis and almost activated the other, perhaps early, I'm thinking, perhaps an early activation of this other piece to go through. So I would not be surprised if you're actually working both, because you've had something, you know, early activate that piece, perhaps before you've completed the other.
I mean, very early, you know, like
Very, very early. Yeah, no,
like,
I'm like that seed thing was embryo. Like that was what I like. That's how it. This is not at the development of the human level.
Yeah, it's because to have had the childhood experiences in such a like a boom, 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 like survival was just and I feel like fighting for my life my whole life.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if it's intergenerational or
Yeah, could well
something,
be.
or,
Yeah.
you know, but I've definitely carried something through that I've been, working on.
Mm, mm.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Why I
it's
asked you about
definitely
that.
existential.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
existential. Yeah. And can you Beth, can you tell the others, your your nationality and family history, just because it does, I think, make a proposition that there might be some intergenerational stuff.
I conveniently forget to include that both my parents are Maltese, and Malta was conquered 7 times in World War II or more. And everybody moved underground to survive the bombings, and it was a very dire time, and both my parents moved here as 6 and 7-year-olds because there was nothing left in the country to eat. My grandma, my dad's mum, I don't know how, for some reason I was like, don't tell the authorities. I just felt this wave of like, don't tell anyone. But she was selling sugar on the black market, in Malta. And Dad said, I don't know how she got her hands on it, but there's this real survival thing that came through Dad. He's been a wheeler and dealer and very frugal, and so I feel like my fear of, like, he's actually hammered into me my whole life. How are you going to survive in the world? I mean, I've proven to him that I can, but I still doubt it. And it's deep. And so worrying about the future is just a part of my daily practice. And everything that looks threatening is like monstrous.
Yeah. And that's not, so it might be typical, but it's not actually how we're born, right? We're not born into having that worry and that concern of it's not part of our true nature, let's say. And I don't mean that in any kind of higher spiritual aspect. I literally mean that we inherit fear or we don't inherit fear. Because neither way is it part of our normal human existence until there is actually something to be afraid of standing in front of us. Right? They're actually, that's not really part, we inherit that. So even if you go back to small tribal communities, they pass on the fear to others about the fear of scarcity. Right? When you're born, you are not aware of scarcity or abundance. You're just aware of, do I have it now? Yes. Okay, fine, good. Right? And so that is what actually ends up being transmitted. And so, of course, you've come from a heritage and a lineage where there was a huge amount of fear around survival, around lack, around all those dire situations that everybody was going through on a daily basis. And there you have it. It's like, well, how are you going to be okay? Because it's nothing's certain, and it probably is not going to be there tomorrow in your ancestors' case. Right?
Yeah. And that just plays out, the same exact story plays out on so many different levels of my life. Like, I wasn't afraid of the whatever they are, the lights that I saw when I was a little girl. I wasn't afraid of them until I was told they were bad.
They were bad. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
There was nothing bad happened. There was no reason to fear them until other people said there was a problem.
Yeah.
So I'm going to suggest something for you, Beth. And I don't think you've never told me about you doing any kind of ancestor practice, but I'm going to make a suggestion if you don't or don't do this, is how about, and I think Tara mentioned this is what she does on a daily basis, is makes an offering to her, morning offering to her ancestors.
That's beautiful.
Mm.
Hmm.
And I think it should
Maybe
definitely
some sugar.
in sugar. Sugar was exactly what I was going to say. Tara, did you have something to add to that bit? Yes, please go ahead.
I'm very clear with the ancestors that I'm offering to. And I offer to the ones who are well and healed, whose strengths I carry forward, and the ones who love, honor, and respect me.
Mhm. Lovely.
So I don't continue to, I'm going to
Yeah.
offer to you and heal all your shit as well. Like I'm already doing my piece.
Yes. Yeah. Lovely. Yeah. Exactly. So all of the you're actually offering the you're making offering to the resilience that you have witnessed in your lineage.
Whose genes resource you in this life.
That's right.
Yeah.
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 Beautiful.
Thank you for that.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Don't mind if I do.
Awesome. Good. All right. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you for bringing in that piece.
Mhm.
I'm sure that for some of us here, that's that resonates for more than just yourself, right? Thank you. Do we need a little break? Does anyone want to have a quick? Yeah, let's have a 5-minute break. I'm not sure what the time is because Apple doesn't tell me things like that, and I haven't. I'll go and get my
It's
phone.
10 after. It's 10 after the hour.
Beautiful, wonderful. Thank you. So let's just have a 5-minute break, and all meet back here very soon. Okay. Recording. Okay. So I hope that was a good little break to have. Like there's a lot of intensity in this particular class. We're really and what we're hearing from others, we're shifting for ourselves in this process, right? And particularly the ancestral piece, it's a really big piece for everybody, regardless of whatever our histories are, So, that will touch us inside in some way. So it's a good reminder here to, to apply self-care, just even by virtue of you getting up and moving and perhaps even making something to drink. That's a self-care thing. Okay. So you have just notice the care that you've given yourself in just doing that. Okay. That you got up, you did something for yourself, attended to your bodily needs in some way. And here you're back again. Right. And maybe even trust that if it would be too much, you wouldn't be back here. Something would have delayed you or waylaid you in some way that you wouldn't even be sitting here perhaps. All right. So if you can really just tune into and trust that here has just even some little magical thing happened that's allowed you to come back. Because here is okay for you to be here. Okay. And if it doesn't feel right, then you can always come back to the recording. Okay. Okay. So before we start, let's just notice our bodies, notice our buttocks sitting on the chair or I'm on a mattress, a cushion on the floor. See if you can notice your feet. And just the weight in your body, in your lower part of your body, in your hips and in your buttocks and your sit bones, in your feet, your thighs, front of the thighs, back of the thighs, sides of the thighs, and how that strength on the sides of the thighs runs in a spiral down the body from the outside of the thighs to the inside of the knees, down the inside of the legs to the inner ankle, and then across the top of the foot, across to the little toe. That's kind of the energy and the nerve. That's our nerve that runs from the outside of the leg. That's the direction that it actually goes. So outside to inner knee, across down through that inside of the calf to the inner ankle, and then it goes across the top of the foot to the outside of the big toe, little toe. So just see if you can notice that on both legs, right? From the outside, the inside, down that inside, across the top to the outside. And then along with the nerve pattern, see if you can feel the strength of your muscles and your tendons and your ligaments and your bones. And what I'm going to ask you to notice is which layer of your tissue feels the most solid, the place where you would really like to land. And I'm just going to repeat them through the layers of tissue. You have skin, fascia, muscles, tendons, ligaments, which really are actually a part of fascia, I believe. I've just been told that. Bones. So some of us will feel it in different parts more considerably than others, right? You may feel your strength and your landing in your body, in your musculature, in your skeletal structure, or your more superficial tissue, like the skin. That might feel like a really nice, safe, light place to be. Or the fascia, which is a very fast moving, bit like a, it's like a bit intangible, like electricity. That can often move too fast for some people, many people, not all people, but many people. So just notice how that is. If that's a little too quick for you, just drop maybe a little bit deeper in to your musculature or your skeletal structure. And if none of those feel right, this isn't tissue, but try your fluids, your blood, lymphatic fluid, your spinal synovial fluid. There's even fluid in the eyes, in the eyeballs, right? Then maybe the fluid feels better. And again, fluids are a very powerful medium. So if that feels kind of icky for you, just come out of it. Come out of the fluids and drop into one of those other tissues that I've mentioned. So see if you can find your happy place right now. Let's be curious, and have you found a happy place in your body with one of those tissues or fluid systems? So this is the whole body. It's not a location in the body. It's a system of the body, if you like. And one of them will be a place of solidity, grounding, safety more than anything else. So this is what we're trying to find is, well, how safe do I feel in each of these places? And so it's not like any of them are bad, but if something's moving a little too fast or if something contains a little bit too much information in this point of time, it's not, there are other safer places to land and be with the body. Okay, and that's all that is. We're just looking for a safer place to be today. All right, and once you've found that, then let's just come out and we'll go back into our discussion of this module. And you can always come back and use that as an anchor, right? Today, for the next sort of half hour that we're with each other. And then you can always experiment with that at another time and see if that's consistently a safe place for you to be, right? Quite often it is. It does, what I found is that it highlights an area that therefore you might need to build capacity to be with, but that you'll generally have an area that you have capacity to be with and feel safe. And that then there'll be those others in between that you have to build capacity for. And there are ways to build capacity through helping all of those systems integrate with each other. Okay, it's through integration that you get more wholeness and you get more resiliency and more capacity. Okay, so that's actually what is the aim and the ideal, is promoting integration. But you can't promote integration until you first identify and differentiate. Okay, so that's really key to the process of integration, is firstly identifying and differentiating. So therefore you can integrate. Okay, and you do that with the tissues of the body. You can do that with your psychology. You can do that with you can do that with your neurology, every single part of your experience. Even when we're specifically when we're working with trauma, for example, we're teasing out the threads of experience of what happened, right, at different levels of body behavior, emotions, the thoughts, various other different experiences. We're teasing out those threads bit by bit by bit. So we're differentiating. So that actually supports the person to feel, like they have more capacity to deal with it because they're dealing with one thread at a time. But in that process of them, working out and dealing with one thread at a time, they're differentiating so that then we can actually promote wholeness through integrating all of those pieces. You cannot integrate those pieces until you know what they are, right? Okay, so every model of work operates in the same way. It's just that you have to figure out what differentiation means for each thing. But it's usually identifying it and then supporting the integration process. Okay. All right. So I'm going to find my cup of tea here, and I'm going to invite someone else to share anything they would like to share about their observation around their core wounds. You can actually bring in a piece around, if you have a question around the that body awareness thing we just did. You now have an opportunity to ask something about that, given of where you are in the session. So, but I'd love to hear from you about some of this shadow work and see if we can pass some of that out for you if there's any questions or thoughts or observations about your own experience you have. Ali, yeah?
I feel like I need to take a breath first. I was in the bathroom and I heard you say something might delay you getting back. And I'm like, hey.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to say is that it's very clear to me, Raquel, that you modeled those slides on me, right? Because I feel like, the whole lot of them, I feel like they're me.
Yeah.
I do feel like I've done a lot of work on both of them. And what do I want to say? I feel like the second one is where my most recent work has been.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, that deeper core belief has had to happen prior to the second one.
Yes.
Yeah, and since I've done that work, I've been able to move on to the work on the other one. each of the strategies that you've outlined, I feel like I've done thanks to you. And that has been amazingly powerful, I think. As each person has been talking before the break, I was several times I don't know whether anybody noticed, but I was fighting sleep. And as each person was talking, there was a certain point where I started to lift out of the need to fall asleep. And then something else was said and I'd go back in it. I don't think I'm there now. I feel like the break has helped me to like actually getting up and walking and doing and that kind of stuff has essentially woken me up again. Yeah, and I don't know, like it's so interesting. I've been able to relate to different aspects of what everybody has said. Like Beth, when you were talking about your family history, I'm like, okay, very different history, obviously, but I feel like the things that I carry has come from my family history as well. So my dad was from a military family, and then my mum was abused as a child. So I definitely carry a lot of that. Yeah, so it's all very interesting.
So, Ali, there's something I'm going to invite you to consider. You know, when you spoke about, you know, dipping in and out of, you know, feeling sleepy and, you know, that you feel like you're more present now and you're not necessarily in it. That was one that I think that was when that alerted me when you said, you know, I'm in it. And so what I suspect, and this is the reason you'll know very soon why I'm not so clear, is because I suspect that there's actually some dissociation happening.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and so here, and I'm going to just use this as an example for the rest of us to understand here is probably a good example of how it might sound when, you know, we're talking to somebody who's done quite a lot of work so that they're not in a distressed or dysregulated state. They're able to name their own experience, etc. Right? But here is probably dissociation is present.
Yeah.
So there are some things that you are disconnecting from.
Yeah.
I mean, you named it straight at the outset, is here you were even delayed coming back from the bathroom, right? So there's enough little clues in there. I don't know if you, like, there was a number of clues in what Ali said that all add up to something is being dissociated, and perhaps more than one thing is being dissociated from. Yeah.
Yeah.
The very nature of dissociation means that, you know, even me as a practitioner, I'm not going to know what that is. Okay. I mean, we can go exploring that and try and find that maybe together, but I will never know what that is ahead of Ali, because she has to know it before I can know it. Even if she can't name it, she has to be connected to it before I can truly connect to it and support and say, oh yeah, it's that way. So the only work that we can do together is, well, not the only work, but we can't do that work. We can do the work of exploring the dissociation. That's the big piece of work we can do together, right? Exploring what dissociation feels like. Now, I'm just going to even invite you to just feel that a little bit now, Ali, is if you did not know and that you were kind of a bit lost, like you got some of the pieces, but there's a couple of pieces missing. Can you feel that and relate to that?
The biggest thing that I feel at the moment is just slightly spinny.
Yeah,
Like
okay,
I
so
feel
let's just
like
stay with that. Let's
Like
just
this.
stay with the, yeah, tell me about how that feels. Yeah.
It's like my insides are going side to side.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I try and move, I'm like gonna
Uh-huh.
fall over or something.
And if any of you feel like you can, I can see Mary's already in there. Go with Ali. Go with Ali. If you feel like you can, drop into that dissociative place with Ali, right? None of us, we don't know anything here.
Mhm.
Don't have to if you don't want to, but here you go, right? Yeah. And so what happens is, you know, that we are going, some of us at least are going here with you, Ali. What changes for you?
I feel like I'm gonna cry.
Uh-huh. And what else is happening?
I think it might be overwhelmed. Like having people surround me feels overwhelming.
And can you actually feel us, or is it just the knowing of us?
A bit of both. Like where I've got my blanket like surrounding me. I feel like there's more than that there. It's more than the blanket. I feel
Right.
like it's everybody.
So you're quite aware of some feelings in this part of your body,
Yeah.
or above that part of your body, which is
It's
it,
around
both?
my shoulders. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it actually your body, or a little bit around it, like here where I'm pointing to, or on your body around your shoulders?
It's both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just bringing your attention to this part of your body and whatever it is, but trying to not ignore this part, but trying to be a little bit more aware of the body part as well, right? Right. Just to make sure that that stays here and you don't kind of get lost in this part here, right? Both of them are here, but here, yeah, and maybe if you even touch this part here that's around, that's it. Yeah. That's right, because that's close to, yeah. How's that going? How's that?
Better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feels more settled now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And just following that settled feeling. Just notice what you notice as you feel more settled.
There's a slight dropping. Like I don't feel like it's a physical drop, but more of an energetic.
Yeah. Yeah. Feel like you're a little bit more here.
Yeah.
That sense of I'm more here now. Yeah. And where is that? Is that leading from some part of your body? I mean, it could be leading from where we're talking about, but maybe somewhere else. So you're here.
No, I feel like it's coming down from above.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it's very likely that Ali was a bit out of her body. Right? That seem likely to you, Ali, now that you're in this
Really.
space? Yeah.
It's a very disconnected feeling.
Yeah. All right. See all the pieces there as we start
Yeah.
to.
And I think the process of putting that suit on, that compression suit on that I have to wear,
Yeah. Yeah, involves a lot of disembodiment.
yeah, like there's so much pushing and shoving and to get me into it. I feel like I disconnect
Yes, you would.
out of necessity so that I can withstand that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then while I was in the bathroom, I had to take it off. So coming back here and doing this with everybody, I feel like has allowed me to start reconnecting.
Yeah. So it's almost like on some level, the treatment is worse than the condition,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And, you know, that maybe not everybody here, but I'm sure there are lots of people that relate to that, like who are being treated for a medical condition and the treatment feels worse than what they're putting up with as the condition.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh,
So that's another trauma, right?
yeah. Oh man, I need tissue.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, everybody.
You okay for me to continue? You all right? Okay. Mary, do you want to say something?
I've just been exhausted and disconnected this whole call.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's, this exhaustion with some of the just the dynamics of my life as a parent and the dynamics of responsibility and I have a child who's mentally ill, and it's been particularly exhausting, like today and yesterday. And it's complete sort of, so I think I was just aware of like complete, like feeling of impossibility, of hopelessness, like, the exhausting kind of entanglement and responsibility and guilt, and also then that can swing into like hard-heartedness and neglect, and I realized that I really wasn't feeling exhausted when I got on the call. I realized this wasn't, it was not just me being tired. So, and something that got my attention and was really interesting, and I don't really have an interpretation, but is kind of noteworthy. When Ali, there was just a moment where I was trying to connect with Ali with that disconnection into this disconnection. Right before Ali, you said, I feel tears, or I feel like I'm going to cry. Like I felt that sadness or grief drop into my experience. I mean, which was my own grief, but then I don't know, something happened right there that caught my attention. It was kind of interesting. With Ali.
Do you consider yourself or relate to the label of empath?
I don't know. At this point, I don't know. I think it's probably something I turned off a long time ago. Long time, a long time ago. Because I didn't know, it caused me a lot of suffering and I didn't understand it. So I guess, so it's yes and no. So
if I say, do you feel other people's feelings. Is that true? Or is that a yes and no as well?
See, I don't know. I think
Okay.
at this point, I don't know. And or sometimes,
Mhm. Yeah.
sometimes.
So sometimes you're clear that you're feeling somebody else's feelings, and other times you may not know. Is that the right answer? Sometimes you feel some things and you're not sure if they're yours or somebody else's. And other times you feel something that you are sure is probably someone else's.
I can hardly understand what you're saying right now. What does that mean, Raquel?
Okay, right. We're just going to let that one land where it needs to land. Is there anything you need right now?
I don't know. I just feel like I need to go to bed. I feel like I just,
Yeah, you're tired, right? And you weren't connected to that until you came into the call, right? How exhausted you felt, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And that's a really valid and important thing, to just even be able to come into a space and realize, how you're really feeling, because it sounds like your life, there's a lot of disconnect from feelings in order to support your daughter and do your parenting and do the life and whatever. So
Keep going. Yeah.
keep going means that you're disconnecting from yourself a lot. And here you came into this space and connected to yourself and just went, oh, I'm so tired, right? So that makes sense to me. Where probably the work is finding pockets of safety in your normal life where you can feel some things, right? Whatever those feelings are, not so you don't discriminate on the feelings, you discriminate on the time or the context of when you can let yourself feel whatever you feel, right? Because probably the only way you've done that up until now is discriminate. Well, I'll let myself feel happiness outside of my own time, or when I'm with my daughter, or you know what I mean? It's like you'll be specific about the kind of feelings you're allowing yourself. But here I'm going to invite you to be specific about the time and context that you can feel anything. And so that just means being very particular about when and where you can allow any feelings to arise and for how long. Okay. So it's just an invitation for something to start to think about. And in a way, it's just going to percolate down. So I'm not expecting you to kind of like get it all now. But when you go back and revisit this recording and you'll just hear what I've said, but it'll already just start to work on you very gently. It's like, oh, okay, how do I let more feeling into my life? It's not necessarily about giving more time for my feelings. It's just about not saying which feelings can come in and which feelings need to stay out. Right. So,
And so I am really curious about this question of empathy. Am I empathetic? Do I? Because it causes confusion.
right.
So there's something. Obviously, there's something
Yes. Yes.
up there.
Yeah.
And so what I'm getting is like, just now is like, well, there's something where I believe that I should be empathetic, like that's a virtue, right?
Right.
Which I think connects with this
Okay.
idea of the vulnerability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my sense is that your work is the boundary work, because the boundary work is what leads to safe differentiation. And then you can actually identify them, me, other, me, right? Because the boundary work is the piece, and in a way that even I should be empathetic is, I think, is almost like a deep programming of then, well, I need to dissolve all my boundaries so that I can feel everything of other people's, right? So it's almost like there's a little program there that you might be unconsciously setting up. So where you need to go is to the boundaries, to establishing the boundary work, right? Where you end and others begin. That's what I mean by boundary in this context.
And so when you talk about boundaries, about boundary work, is this, is this energetic, and is this verbal?
No.
Is it behaviors,
Yes,
or is
good
it all of
question.
these? Like,
Yeah,
what do you
well,
get?
no, in your work, in your case specifically, I'm talking about it, it's more of an energetic boundary that you can see physically manifest through the visual experience of like the wall or the self feeling the like, oh, it's like, oh yeah, here I am. And in this space here, between here and here, what do I feel? Oh yeah, okay, no, I can feel other things in there. So maybe my boundary is here. So it is more energetic work. But you can use like the things like the wool and even standing in different places in the room in relation to either, let's say, you can imagine your daughter, or you could put like a pillow on the ground to be your daughter, which is what psychodrama kind of does, or those kinds of practices do. Some of the family constellations do the same sort of thing, where they might put a pillow on the ground to stand for something, or choose an object to stand for something. So we're trying to make the energetic manifest in a way that you can see and experience and feel it through your body, but it is absolutely energetic. Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense to you in terms of
Yeah.
where you think the work is? Because that's where I sense the work is for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not about making specific boundaries with your daughter, or, or your parenting, or that sort of stuff. You can certainly explore that. Is like, this is what I would do, is where does the boundary between Mary and Mary the parent, right? So you could play with that boundary, maybe not straight away, that maybe not your first exploration, right? But that could be an exploration, is the boundary between Mary the lover, or Mary the creative, or Mary, whatever, Mary the self, however you might see that, and Mary the parent. So you can play with that sort of boundary. So again, like it's adding more information into your physical reality, but it's definitely in that felt sense experience that is very close to the energetic world. Yeah. Okay. And I would really just make that your primary area of attention, because everything will come from there. Yeah. Okay. And if you need to make a boundary now of turning off your camera or even going to bed, that is fine to also make. Okay. All right. Thanks, Mary.
I think I'm going to say goodnight. I think I'm going to say
Great.
goodbye.
Wonderful. Great choice. Goodbye. We'll see you next week for our last
All right.
call.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. All right. So it's either Sasha or Beth. Or yes, I mean, I'm just wondering what to do. does everybody feel like they can stay on? Because we're just coming up to the time. Does everyone feel like they can stay on, or and do you want to continue, the last two people? Is that fine? Feel okay with everybody? You need to go, Sybil? And Beth?
I can stay for 10 or I can stay for 10, maybe 15 minutes, but not longer than that.
And Beth, where are you at?
I think I can do 10. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there is room for one, and then we're going to have to pick up one next week, which is fine, right? So between Beth and Sasha, do either of you feeling the pull? Sasha's feeling the pull? Yeah.
For me, I fluctuate between both of the archetypes, I guess. Like I feel like I am now. I feel like I've got a foot in both camps most of the time, basically. But I had a realization earlier in the call that I remember feeling, you know, when you're kids and you start talking around the meanings of names and things, and I discovered that the meaning of my name was helper. I had resentment towards that because I'm just like, I can't get away from it. Like that's just, it's every part of who I am, whether it's DNA or whatever. It's sort of like that's the role I've been born into. I've even been given the name that means helper and all that sort of stuff. But as a kid, I just thought it was a big joke, and there's a level of resentment that's just dropped in for me around being labelled a helper and living up to that role, even though it's felt like it comes naturally to me, and it's not something that I feel like I work hard at. I work hard at the boundaries around not being a helper. And I was feeling dozy earlier in like Ali, and I had the realization that it was a bit of dissociation going on and that sort of stuff as well. So you're not alone. And yeah, it just, it kind of feels a little bit surreal because I don't resent who I am as a person, but I like there's obviously that deeper level thing of why is this the only thing for me?
Right.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So there's that confusion because that sort of, when I'm in that role and I'm in that flow, it comes naturally and it feeds my soul. So what's this other bit that I'm resenting around it, because it's obviously on a deep level that's come up because it was something it just literally smacked me in the face.
Yeah. So, you know, I can think about, I mean, I think there's not a clear, like it's an answer you have to find for yourself. And I think that there is probably many parts to the process.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things, you know, that I relate to that is the origins of my name comes from Rachel. And Rachel means mother. And I have a very big mother wound, right? And what I noticed a number of years ago in my client work is that my clients were projecting mother onto me. In some way, they were wanting mothering, let's say, energy from me. I'm not saying that they wanted me to, you know, infantilize them, but they were wanting mothering energy from me. And, you know, there was a big pushback very initially from me. And then I was like, I can see that's what the universe is delivering me. I can either resist this probably for lifetimes if I chose, or I can fall into this and say, okay, how do I integrate this energy within myself? right? So here is the piece is like, and so that may involve, you know, many things, but it's really, for me, it was the surrendering to the signs, surrendering to what others needed from me and what I was being asked of. And actually, I think that's the big piece, is stopping that why me, God kind of response, which is fuck you, God, I don't like what you've given, go back and give me something else, right? It's letting go of that, which is the ego, right? And saying, okay, all right, okay, if this is what you have delivered me, then help me integrate this, transcend my resistance to it, and help it become a healthy integration of this quality that I have. That was my experience. And I think it does fall into that vulnerability piece, which is I have control over my own life, and no other being, including some divine aspect of God, is going to tell me how to run my life, right?
Yep.
And that's where it comes into that vulnerability piece.
Yep.
So that's where the befriending is helping yourself. And you don't have to do it as a big surrender. You surrender that part. That's where you begin, right? Surrender starts with a nut. It starts with a seed. It starts with one thing. It's not surrendering and saying, okay, I give everything over to God. That rarely happens. I mean, if somebody has a major transcendental experience, that would happen. But for most of us, what happens is it starts with one seed being given over, and then another, and then another, and then another, right? So there's one of your big seeds there, Sasha, is in, okay, this is showing up for me. There's a purpose and a reason, and where I begin is stopping being resentful and angry towards God for delivering me my purpose, and actually seeing if I can make friends with that purpose in a way that feels wholesome, integrated, and good for me.
Yeah. It
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So none of this has to be self-sacrificial, apart from the surrender piece.
Yep.
That's the only piece that you have to give something over to. The rest of it, in terms of how you help, who you help, all of that stuff all becomes choice.
Yep.
It's just that you're dropping into stopping that I don't want to be this thing that I've been born to be.
Yeah.
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 Because you can't escape it.
No.
You can just resist it. That's all you can do.
Yeah, that's it. And that's
Until
just
you
yeah,
don't.
just banging your head on a brick wall anyway.
That's right.
So
And you'll just be really unhappy for a long time.
yeah, yeah.
Believe me.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, but it's interesting that I've not felt it from that perspective before. It was just one of those, oh yeah, I can't outrun this.
Yes.
Sort of, as a kid, it was sort of like, yeah, I can't outrun it, but I didn't recognize that there was a level of resentment that I couldn't outrun it. So
Yeah. Great.
so it's interesting as well that that's dropped in.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, well, that means that you're a lot closer to having a conversation with this power that creates our reality, that includes us, but is
Yeah.
also outside of us.
Yeah.
Right? It's not
Yeah.
entirely us.
Yeah.
Although on some level it is, because we are everything. Right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's sensed as external force. And
Yeah.
how do we give ourselves over to that external force without sacrificing ourselves? Right? That's the question.
Yeah. And that's where the unsafeness feels, that's the vulnerability piece.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
most of us will relate to that, right? If not all of us. So it's a very helpful piece, Sasha. Thank you. And let's just hear a little bit from Beth. And maybe maybe we finish quickly or maybe we don't, but I think it's important that we at least hear from Beth, and even if some of you have to go, we'll just work with that.
I don't really have much to say.
Okay.
So I listened to the empath videos today, and I listened to more of his series on that, and it was very interesting, and a lot of what people said today resonated with me. What you helped me with the other day was very helpful. Just knowing how to apply that piece, it made a difference. A piece of feeling my feelings, but like, so my question was, I felt like I could cry forever. Like I felt like I needed to get it out, but I didn't know if, but I felt like it also would not stop. And so Raquel just, said, try feeling it, and then also having something to orient and ground at the same time. And that was
being able to shift your attention from one to the other, even if you only stayed with the feeling wanting to cry for even 30 seconds before moving across, right?
Right.
Yeah. So allowing both to be there, but just in that lovely sort of oscillating state of, oh yeah, when the feeling is becoming too much, shifting across, right?
Right. Yeah. And I just, yours, you had talked about, a piece of fabric with a pleasant texture feel to it, or music. And so I actually found myself using both of those, and also sort of butterflying around the room.
Wonderful.
So,
Yeah. So
yeah, and I can totally relate with the dissociation, the falling asleep fatigue thing that happened to me a couple of sessions ago, really strongly for the very first time. I didn't know really what was going on. And then it happened again with the shamanic drumming, but not quite to that extent. So yeah, I totally get that. I have to go to bed now thing. So.
I think it's useful, that's a useful thing to contemplate as therapists and session holders. There are often times when our clients' dissociation or drowsiness, even if we don't know what it's for, pulls us in. Okay, you may have experienced that, right, where you're literally being pulled, into a deep sleep by a client, perhaps. That's happened to me when I've done body work and have been touching clients in particular. So any of you who are body workers or energy workers, you will definitely know, like hands-on energy workers, then you'll definitely know how it can feel for somebody's body to just pull you into what's like a deep sleep or some kind of dream-like state. And I think it's really tricky to work out whether it's dissociation or whether there's another purpose behind it. Okay. Thank you, Beth. So, and that's always the question is like, well, what is happening here? And you may not always have the answer. Sometimes the client is pulling you into a state that they need you to be in to work with them, right? But it's still probably dissociation, even if it's where they need you to be. Okay, so that's I think is what I have found is that even when I've like, well, this is where they can't have me working at another level. They need me, particularly people who are very sick, right? Nervous system illness or really sick people. They need to get any real effect. They need you to be in the dissociation, in that deep dorsal freeze with them. So you may be doing healing work in there, but it's actually, they're still dissociated or they're in deep dorsal freeze, but that's the only place that they can actually experience any benefit. But it's still telling you about what their nervous system state is, that they need to have, that they're not connected to their full reality because they're in a lot of pain or, you know, whatever's going on for them. Okay. So I think that helps maybe differentiate, is like, it still may be helpful, but it's still dissociation or deep dorsal freeze. There is no reason why you need to pull somebody out of deep dorsal freeze. Unless, you know, like the piece that I was doing with Ali, which was very clearly helping her regain some pieces, right? So that's a very different thing than, she's not sitting in deep dorsal freeze all the time. There are pieces of her that are, right? But then there are also pieces of her that can move into presence quite easily and not feel distressed, right? When you came into presence, you actually felt better, right? At least for a while, right? You may not after a while as well, right? So that's, you know, probably what's fueling the dissociation, is that at some point being in presence feels too painful. So, you know, off we go again, right? But presence itself is not something that she has to blanket ignore, right? It actually is beneficial for her. So building her capacity to be in presence is beneficial. There's somebody who's really unwell. And so the person I'm thinking about, I was working on, had MS. And so there was, and she'd only fairly recently been diagnosed and was already having physical problems. And she's actually a lot better mentally now, many years on. But at the start, I think there was a lot of, I don't know, a lot of psychological distress, a lot of, I just need to check out of this, you know. So you can imagine, right? It's like, okay. And so there is a really good example too of how something like a degenerative disease like MS can actually get better, because there is some form of meeting and acceptance of what's going on. So then she's not in that deep dorsal freeze anymore. Right. And then as a result of not being in that deep dorsal freeze anymore, yes, she's not walking as well or coordinated as well, but actually in terms of her pain and her capacity and all those things, she's much better. Right. So there's a lot of nuances that you're working with, but you know, this is just to name that deep dorsal, you know, falling into a sleep state that you brought in again, Beth. You know, it is that needing to somehow find a way to cope, and you know, and that's sort of what's going on when you need to drop into those places. Thank you, Sybil. We're going to be rounding up soon, so yeah, really won't have missed much. Thank you. We'll see you next week. But I appreciate too, Beth, that you're feeling a little differently today because you also have a little bit more resource on a number of levels, right? And you do look different today. You do look more present and more alive and more bright today. So it's really lovely to see, actually. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Because I slightly tangented, but it was all on the same topic, but I kind of moved away from you in particular. So let's just come back to you and see if there's anything that is alive in you now.
There was something, oh, that's what it was. This idea of feeling like I need to help all the time.
Mhm.
I've really this past week have pulled back from that and thought, no, you don't have to do that. And that's okay. And it doesn't make you a bad healer.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and that's been really good. I've
Lovely.
pulled back from my over preparing for clients and classes, and I'm just fully there when I'm there.
Mm. So it sounds like, and I know we haven't dived deep into that, but it sounds like for you, it's more of the first core belief around being unloved, insignificant, and inconsequential that might be where you can get triggered at this point of time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That existential, do I exist? And what is the purpose of my existence? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a very ironically, it's a very vulnerable place, because there's actually, I say ironically because the other one's obviously the fear of vulnerability, right? But with this particular, it just always feels very tender and very not fully formed, right? There's a lack of form in the actual structure of resiliency in the person that needs to actually be. And that's why, so that practice we did a little earlier about finding whether your bones, your muscles, your fascia, or your skin, where did you identify, Beth, if anywhere? Did you find a place for yourself?
No, it felt like all of it, like
Okay.
each one as you went, that it was
Had-
that.
Felt good.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. So that might be an awesome practice for you to do, because it sounds like there's a certain level of integration already there. So I would suggest, particularly for you, given that's where you say you feel, is do that yourself. You can do it through touch as well. And the way you would do it through touch is literally you're doing it through all your levels by touching, for example, right, your hand. That's all
Right.
you're doing. So you're connecting your intentionality and your kind of like your awareness through the skin, and then dropping into the layer of the fascia, spreading out through those ligaments and tendons, and then dropping into the muscle, and then into the bones. And what should happen really is that, your awareness spreads from beyond your hand, right, to the whole body as you start to really drop into those pieces, right? So it's not just your hand, you're becoming aware of your whole muscle system, your whole skeletal system, your whole skin boundary. Okay.
Mhm.
So I would bring that in as a practice too, Beth.
Okay.
Wherever you feel like it's a good place to do it. It sounds like that would be really good for you. Okay, it's a really it's a reasonably advanced practice, but if you're really getting a sense of that each place had its own sense of resourcefulness for you, go
Right.
with it. It should be a great practice for you.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're going to finish up here. Does anybody have anything? I think, Candy, you just had a quick question. I mean, maybe I can answer it in another context if need be, but I'll just check. Do you want to just ask your question, Candy, or let's see if I can roll it? Here we go. Where's your? I can't see your question, Candy, so you're going to have to. Oh, hang on, maybe it's up. No, I can't scroll the chat for some reason. Candy, do you want to just ask your question?
Yeah, it was just when, what you're talking about, how a client might pull you into that state, is then the missing piece that, like, when that session has finished, coming back to your practices of coming back into your own presence, so that you don't then stay there for days and weeks and think, what happened,
Totally.
I'm totally wiped after a session. It's just,
Exactly.
we need
Yeah,
to come back.
Yeah, in a way, what they're doing is they're saying, come into, you can't help someone unless you meet them where they're at. Okay, so that's the first piece, right? You need to meet somebody where they're at, and that means at a nervous system level as well. Now, it doesn't always mean going as deep as they are into each nervous system state, but it does mean coming into some relationship with their nervous system state, right? So in some way, you have to come into that. Now, when you're really pulled in, you know, that in itself is this question. Okay, so is that client really, they're really asking you to find some pieces, help them. This is the shamanic piece as well. It's like that journey, you're taking a journey within that realm, that nervous system state, because they're pulling you in saying, help me find the pieces, I'm completely lost, right? So it's almost like a soul retrieval process. Okay. And so you need to be able to come out of it and say, I am no longer looking for those clients' missing pieces, because when the session is ended, right? That's the thing. It's like, okay, so whatever we found or didn't find will still be there another day. I'm not going to keep having a piece of me continue to do that work, which I'm very familiar with doing for days and weeks on end, still continuing to do that work, looking for that piece on the behest of that client.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that happens to me a lot when I do Reiki healings or
That's
even
right.
Reiki workshops.
Yes.
And even you touching on MS, like one of the last Reiki workshops, I was wiped out for weeks afterwards. And I know that, you know, one of them had MS and there was a lot of trauma in that group. So, and I remember thinking, you know, am I ever going to come out of this feeling exhausted, bone deep freeze for, you know, a long time? So makes sense.
Some of you are here in this group because you identify with the archetype of shaman, even if you may not, you know, see yourself as exactly performing shamanic work, right? You identify with that archetype, and that's what I've really just what we're describing here, right? Is this unconscious in a way? How do we make it a little bit more conscious? The invitation that we've just followed, which is to go and find and retrieve some parts for others, and because they can't do it for themselves, right? So again, this is that whole how do we engage with power? Because that is actually the truth. That's the shaman's path, is how do they engage with power? And in traditional, perhaps, shamanic cultures and civilizations, then there was a very clear understanding of an imbalances of power, that the shaman held, right? But here we're actually trying to integrate power. Okay, so this is why it's a little different, but we have to acknowledge that how power is worked, right? So we're not trying to build our power so that we have more than others so we can go off and do their work for them, kind of, which is sort of the old way of the shaman. Yeah. We're trying to build our power so that then we can invite other people into power, the same kind of empowerment with us, and that we can do our work together. Right? That no one is more equipped than another to go journeying for somebody else. Now, they may at this time, but the job is to bring people into that empowerment so they can.
Yeah. Love that. Thanks so much.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'll leave it there, because I think and we can totally come back to that next week. We've got time. We're going to do a beautiful practice. I'm going to teach you an embodied meditation practice, and that we're going to have more time for exploring and sharing. Okay, next week. Okay. And thank you very much for today's class. It's really been so rich. And I appreciate that you brought all of your vulnerabilities and humanness to the table in all forms. And we all got to witness each other and your beauty. So thank you. Bye-bye.